here, everybody. Just before we get into the content, just a reminder about focus as we think about generating impact reports and why we're doing that. We can generate impact reports for a number of reasons, often for strategic decision making, strategic learning. But what we're really talking about today is generating an impact report in order to track and communicate your progress. And so let's talk about why that's important and about how we can go about doing that. So why an impact report? There are a ton of reasons. Some that I have brainstormed here with you is to mark progress, to celebrate success, to sustain momentum, to increase will, to inspire action, to raise more funds. And so all of these may speak to you. Just a couple of them may speak to you. You may have other reasons, but an impact report is really powerful and is so helpful as you're going to build momentum within a community, to validate your work, your partner's work, and really figure out how to tell the story of the work you're doing. And so while it can feel like a lot of work to create an impact report, once it's done, it does so much. It's really powerful. And so as we think about who the impact report is for, the tricky thing is that it's kind of for everybody. It's for the general public, it's for influencers, it's for decision makers. And so the question becomes, how do we actually create something for everyone? So my recommendations for you, if you're dealing with this tricky spot of having to create something for everyone, is making sure you're providing all the context. If somebody knows something, they can skip over it, but we can't, conjure up the context without you providing it. Use plain language. Save the detailed analysis, and things that really get to the complexity of the work for an appendix. If people are interested, they know how to find that there. Tell stories and really animate the data, and also handhold the reader. We don't want the reading experience to ever be the thing that's complicated. And so we want to ensure that people know where they are at in the report and in the work that you're doing as well. So as we look at the process for creating an impact report, let's just look at these three really simple buckets. First, let's collect the information, then we'll create a report, and then we'll share the report. And so this module today is organized according to these three sections. And so let's start with collecting the information. So as you look into all of the information that you want to include in your impact report, we've bucketed it in these three areas. So all the information you need to set the context for your work. So that will include the who we are information, the partner names, relevant environmental context, as well as those population level poverty stats. A section that speaks to your strategy. And so this may be a theory of change or a logic model. It will include your definitions and domains and indicators and poverty thresholds, depending on what you have there. And then it will also include your research methods and limitations and a contribution statement. Now, in your workbook is further details of a lot of these sections and examples as well. So I encourage you to reference that as you're thinking about what pieces of information you have in these sections. And then the third kind of bucket of information is progress and impact information. So getting at the activities, outputs, outcomes, impact per domain. And also really want to encourage you to include those qualitative outcome stories. So this is something that we're really wanting to encourage communities to do as they look to create impacts reports that make these human connections and tell the narrative and invite people in and to understand the story. So throughout this whole series, you've been following along with the how to get to population level change and using these 4 outcome areas. And so we're encouraging you that when you're speaking and looking at progress and impact information, that we want to map them and use the narrative to tell the story of how all of these pieces fit together and are getting you to the impacts that you want to see. So let's look at just a few examples of some of those ingredients for the report. And we'll look at example from Living St. John. They've been at it for a while. And so we're able to reference and look at their report for inspiration. So, you know, they've used graphics to explain the who we are. Their theory of change is there. They have the list of partners. The list of partners is so simple, but so key to speak to that momentum and thank people and speak to how this is a community-wide effort. They have the population level poverty stats. They have the activities, outcomes, impacts organized by their priority areas. And so your workbook also includes further examples of each of those sections. And also the appendix that's been created references the components of where you can go from the earlier modules to pull this information that you'll be needing into your impact report, and trying to make it easy to pull those pieces together. So that's collect the information. Also in your workbook, you'll see that this section has been organized by things that we would consider must have, things that we would consider like to have, and things that would be love to have. And so see this as a way, you know, you're all at different stages. And so look at that, look to that as a guide for what would be that bare minimum, and then what would really kind of make your report sing as you're collecting these pieces of information. Let's move on to creating the report. And so as we think again around the role of this report, we've outlined 7 guidelines for communicating impact. You know, what makes a really strong impact report, and then what makes the ones that aren't quite as powerful. And so we hope that these 7 guidelines are helpful for you as you frame out what you want your report to look like. And so we'll run through each of these now, and I'll provide examples for each as we go as well. So first up, decide how you want the report to feel. This is really simple, but it sets the tone, you know, and based on what your work, you know, what you're doing and what you're looking to do. So, you know, as I look at these 3 examples, you know, this one is a little bit more serious, you know, and this one is really, it's a bit more playful, you know, and this one really connects me to the people who might be impacted or might be working together. And so think about, you know, what words come to mind when you think about what you want your impact report to feel like, and also what's needed, you know. And so where do you want to go? You know, an impact report sets the stage for looking forward as well. And so the look and feel, the graphics, the color, they can all shape that. And so, you know, write down some words for how you want it to feel. And then as you're thinking later about graphics, you can reference those words and use that to see how you're doing, and brief a designer if you're using one. Number 2 is set the context. So it's so very important to kind of over explain in terms of context setting. Everyone who's reading this report will be coming at it from a different understanding, and likely nobody will be in it as deeply as you are. And so we really want to do some kind of heavy lifting in terms of the context setting. So this can include things like the definitions, you know, what is poverty? What are our goals? Why this strategy? You know, what are the principles? What are the levers of change? How will we evaluate success? So just being really explicit with those, with setting the context. Some more examples, you know, so it's coming in the form of a letter in this example from Edmonton, but, you know, they're including a paragraph on the history. They've included their definition of poverty and a description of complexity. And so that's really important, especially for people who may not be used to the way of working in order to get to the change that you're seeking. The next page in this letter is around explaining the priority areas, explaining the role of the backbone, explaining what's being reported on in this report. So all just beautiful examples of setting the context. Edmonton continues with the setting the context by including those relevant population level stats in a way that's really easy to understand. In terms of where to set the context, we would encourage you that, upfront is helpful when we're thinking about the macro, like the history, also things that are setting the environmental context. So in this example from Wood Buffalo, they include a section here on the Wood Buffalo context, and then also a page on the wildfires that they were experiencing, because that had a lot of outcomes in terms of the progress that they were making. But also the need to set the context throughout. So as we go into each of the domain areas, there's likely a sentence or two about setting the context. And it might be stats relevant to that area. It might be the history, how long you've been working together, who's been working together, all of those pieces. So just go back and think, okay, have I explained everything that I need to for somebody who's new to this work? Here are just two more examples of setting the context that I love from Wood Buffalo. So, in just really, human terms, what do we mean by ending homelessness? And spelling out what actually that means. And then here's the example of that Wood Buffalo context page that they've talked about the ups and downs and the impacts and how that's affected the stats. Number 3 is tell the narrative. So this is, we're just seeing this as really important for the next stage of impact reporting. So as we've been following along and encouraging communities to report on their impact throughout the years, we've seen a movement towards making reports more accessible, and with that came a lot of graphics and infographics and that sort of thing, which was wonderful. But the thing that we noticed was often missing when we went to that super graphic infographic type style is missing the human connection. And so we're starting to see more communities tell some of those stories, which really helps animate the data. It helps break it down. It helps make it understandable. And, throughout this series, Mark's been talking about the parative and how weaving that narrative through is so important. So it's about connecting those individual interventions. How do they weave together? Validating the importance of that incremental and cumulative change and how it builds upon each other, and also explaining how all of this collective work is contributing to population level change. And so really want to encourage you to think about what is the narrative of both your collective work and also the narrative within each of your domain areas. So similar to context, we're setting context throughout, we're also wanting to tell the narrative throughout. And in your workbook, there's an example as well of a parative that gets at the general initiative as well as the domain areas, and also some questions and prompts to help you develop the parative for your work as well. Number 4 in our principles for communicating impact is to make human connections. So here's an example from Iowa. They have these photos and they're telling Missy and Ronnie's story about what was the change for them, what happened after that intervention, and seeing the face and hearing the impacts on an individual just make all of the work come to life. And so I've got some more examples here. This is from the Halton Poverty Reduction Roundtable. And so, it's all about, no numbers without narrative, no narrative without numbers. And so side by side, they talk about the numbers, but then what that looks like in terms of how it impacts. I want to encourage you. So actually in this example, they don't have direct quotes, but they paint that picture in terms of what it would look like for somebody. So they're telling the story on that individual person impact. How would it impact a person rather than X number of people? It's the micro rather than the macro. We can understand when we're thinking about what would that look like for our neighbor who is also a single parent. You know, it helps us understand what that data means. A few more examples here, and this one comes again from Wood Buffalo. So the combination between the numbers and the narrative. So, you know, average number of clients using shelters, and then, you know, a success story that's related to that. And so pairing them together side by side, they support and complement each other. Number 5, make it easy to understand. So, you know, throughout all of this, we want to use plain language. We want to repeat key terms. We want to use visuals, and we want to break up text. And so I pulled an example, and this one's from the Canadian Cancer Society. You know, I love their wording. You know, we're helping people cope. It's simple. It's like, yes, this is what we're doing. It's not, you know, the name of the intervention, the title of the program. It's speaking to what are we actually trying to do. And then for each of these examples, so, you know, we're helping people cope. Over here, when they're explaining some of the outcomes, you know, thanks to you, we helped people cope. You know, and so it's repeating that. It's explaining, here was the goal, and here are the outcomes related to that goal. They also use the same visual format for each of their program areas. So, you know, as you're thinking about each of your domain areas, think about using visuals to show people where they're at in the report. So, you know, here's an image, here's the goal statement, what that domain area is all about. Here's a description, and then here's the outcomes, you know, and using icons, using imagery, breaking up text, not having everything in long text boxes, really, you know, simplifying and using graphics to break it up. We can do the same thing, you know, in visually depicting strategies, key activities, and outcomes. So it's really simple to understand, and people can find themselves in the report. And another example here from Halton, they've used a timeline, you know, to break up the progress of the information. I did find in this report, I got a little bit lost. And so I just wanted to share it with you as an example of because the title was the biggest thing, you know, progress, the impact of collaboration. I didn't know which domain area I was in. And so think about hierarchy of titles, you know, when we're in a certain section, when we're in this leadership program, when we're in a certain domain area, make sure that the reader knows where they're at in the report, and use the visuals that way to mark the sections. Let's move on to number 6. So just 2 to go. We really want to answer the question, so what? So in this impact report, why these numbers? When do you expect to see impact? What's the change? Why is that important? What challenges arose? What's changing? And so I'll show you some examples of each of those. So Iowa has within their report, you know, where we win. They call out specifically, you know, here's what our goals are, here's what we're fighting for in the why, and here's the threshold. When we get here, we win. And I think that's just so helpful in describing the so what. Why is this important? Now, I realize that you might not all have poverty thresholds in your work. And so here's another example from Leeds in the UK. And in their plan on a page version of their common agenda, they have this section on the right titled How We'll Know If We Made a Difference. And it's a list of indicators of things that they're looking for and the changes that they would like to see to know that they've made a difference. And so that forward looking, what's the change we're hoping to see? That's another example of a way to do that. This is an example on the left here of, you know, what was the change, and articulating that in a way that's easy for people to understand. And so, you know, before the intervention, and this is a housing intervention, time for being rehoused was 40 days, and through the intervention it got down to 22. And so that before and after is a really easy and helpful way to show that what is the change. And then the example on the right is, why is that important? So we have our goal, but why does that matter? Why is that the goal? I think often we assume that the goal is really self-explanatory, but sometimes, and especially if you're focusing on a certain priority area, maybe before something else, because if we make impact here, it will then be easier for subsequent work. Why are we focusing on this now? Why is that important? And really be explicit, because we can't assume that a general public picking up this impact report understands some of these things. And so be really clear in answering that so what question. Another example from Enough for All from Calgary. So, within each of their impact areas, they list the challenges, the things that didn't go right. And I think that's really helpful and important to name what the challenges are. And then also what's changing. And so here's another example from Living St. John. At the end of each area within each priority project, they talk about what's changing. So based on this research, we decided to establish a matching service. So what changed? You did this work over the past year. What changed? What are you doing differently? What's happening next? So the last principle is that we always want to share what's next. So I have some great examples of this, but it could include, what are your plans for the next year? So think about the work in macro, and this example on the left from Wood Buffalo speaks to that. So what are our next steps over the coming year? What's most important? Or it could be at the micro level too. So within each domain, within each priority area or project, what are the priorities for the coming year? So what are the plans? But also when we think about what's next, it should also include an invitation. So much of this work is about building momentum and creating public awareness, and your impact report, as we think about getting to population level incomes, impacts, think about what role is this report serving to build that public will. And so an invitation is so important. How can others join in? There's a role for everybody. So what's the invitation? How can you be explicit with how people can be part of it, can contribute, and also motivate them to want to do that as well? So that was number 2, create the report. We've talked about collecting the information. We've talked about creating the report. And now let's talk about sharing the report. So what are the components that are really helpful as we think about sharing? So, you have your report. And I would say that, let's focus on creating that report. Let's use that narrative to make it digestible and weave the components through. But then we can also take that report and break it up as we're looking to disseminate that with our different audiences. So as you think about, okay, how do we share this with the general public? Of course you can share the full report. But are there other ways that the information can be communicated? Could there be a video summary? And so I think this is where the narrative could be really helpful, because the narrative tries to simplify and make things, the connections between things, really understandable. And so I think about creating a video by somebody reading the narrative with pictures in the background, with some key stats. And that could be a really simple way. You've already done the work. It's a more minimal lift to get to a video summary of the impact for the past year. And that could be a wonderful way of sharing this report, in that, in a 5-minute chunk rather than, an hour-long read. And so you might have that video summary. You could have social media snippets of sections of your report. You could have a news article. You could have a poster, so if you have done some graphics to communicate the impact, they could be created into impact posters. You could have community events where you're sharing these components and inviting some of the people who have been impacted to share their own stories in person. So think about how you're taking that information and sharing it to the general public. Think about the influencers, the people you need to share this information in a different way. Think about their unique situation. So which components of the report are most relevant to them, and how could you do a deep dive into each of the priority areas for those influencers within each of your domain areas? Could you present, impact reports at a staff forum, or at a subject matter conference? And then think about your decision makers. What do they need as they're looking to understand the impact that you've made? And so really think about, once you create the report, that's amazing, celebrate hard, but then also think about how you're breaking that down for the different audiences. In terms of creating the report, we often get asked, what sort of resources will you need? And so just to try to be helpful, you need somebody to pull the content together. You likely have, if you reference the appendix, you have all of this information collected, but it's a matter of pulling it together, getting imagery, getting the data, the graphs created. So pull the content together, could take anywhere between 10 to 40 hours, just as a ballpark. You need somebody to edit, and you need somebody to design. And so this is speculation just to be helpful. So use this as a starting point to decide where are you at in terms of the resources that you have and what you can commit. And then also, when you think about the design, you have options. You could have zero design, and that is fine. You could have a minimally designed report, or you could have a fully designed report. And so, it kind of depends at, where you're at in your work, and what resources you have and what time you have. And so just want to encourage you that all of these levels are okay. And just like pulling the information together is a big step. So thank you so much. We the supporting resources for this module are the workbook that explains more about collecting the information and how to create the report and then share the report, and different exercises or activities for you to think through where you're at. And there's also an appendix which will help you build the report if you want to use that. So looking forward to discussing together. Back to you, Natasha.